Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Jacob Wilhelm, and I represent the Polish Investment and Trade Agency. We are a co-organizer of this event, and it is my great pleasure to co-host this conversation between Poland and Australia on one of the most important subjects of our times: energy transition towards net zero emissions. Well, today we will be discussing about how Poland and Australia should use their capabilities to look for a collaboration in their energy transition. Both energy systems are currently based very much on coal, and both countries put a top priority to make this transition possible. Facing, of course, lots of challenges from technology to social aspects. Therefore, such discussions are crucial to learn from each other, to show best practices and implement already working solutions. Poland is right now one of the largest beneficiaries from the EU Green Deal. This is a strategy that aims to transform the 27 EU countries from a high to a low carbon economy. And now, as we are focusing on recovery from the COVID-19, transforming the energy sector is in Poland is one of the top challenges in our national recovery plan. The Polish government made green energy the biggest part of this recovery plan, putting over 6 billion euros for boosting low carbon energy sources and increase energy efficiency. And by the way, similar amount will be spent on sustainable transportation. In total, it's about 38% of the 24 billion euros from the EU grants will be spent on the green tech in the next 5 years. As a Polish investment and trade agency with a network of 50 offices around the world, we all noticed that more and more businesses, and these are both big corporations, but also small and medium companies, are getting serious about air pollution and commitments to combat climate change. For example, hydrogen. This is a really great example. Poland now plans to invest almost 800 million euros to develop the production and distribution of hydrogen. We also have become a European leader in the production of lithium-ion batteries. We've got currently over 61 battery manufacturing plants, and this makes us the third in Europe after Germany and Italy. Last year, export of Polish batteries reached almost 3 billion euros. I also mentioned transportation before. So Poland's first electric car manufacturing should start the production in 2024. So the numerous projects have been successfully executed by Polish companies and foreign investors in our country. And the last few years have proven that Poland has become one of the best European locations to scale up and to accelerate the penetration of a global clean energy solutions. I would like to thank you to Banksia Foundation and the Polish Australian Business Forum and all the guests and panelists for your commitment to help us to build those economic bridges, particularly in the energy transition and sustainability between Poland and Australia. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jacob. My name is Grażyna Van Egmond. I am the CEO of the Banksia Foundation and a co-partner in this webinar today. Dzień dobry and witamy wszystkich w Polsce. and a good evening to everyone coming from Australia. I hope that you have nice, strong cup of coffee in Poland, and in Australia here, I think we're still starting to get into the red wine. So it should be a very interesting session. But in the spirit of reconciliation, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connection to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Well, I'm very excited to be part of this partnership through the Banksia Foundation to see how both Poland and Australia could possibly collaborate in our transition to a more sustainable energy source and the various applications that come with that. We all know that our future development depends on taming and using energy. Our modern technology, our heavy economy consumes vast amounts of it, mostly from coal, oil and natural gas. Globally, fossil fuels contribute nearly 3/4 of humanity's greenhouse gas emissions. So the energy transition from fossil fuel to renewables was not initiated because of its immediate benefits. It was driven by the external need to protect us from climate change. But today, this transition is being seen more and more as a shift that is not accompanied by a hit to the economy. And there is more and more data being produced to support this. Just as a reference, we all know that both Poland and Australia signed up to the Paris Agreement, declaring clear targets on limiting the greenhouse gas emissions, with Australia saying that it will implement an economy-wide target to reduce emissions by 26 to 28% below 2005 levels by 2030. And Poland, as a member of the EU, committed to a target of at least 40% domestic reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 compared to 1990, to be fulfilled jointly as set out in the conclusions by the European Council of October 2014. Both countries have set targets, but today in 2021, how are our ambitions, our knowledge, our engagement, and our actual actions working towards achieving these targets? The UN Sustainable Development Goal 17, it's my very favorite and I live by it. It's all about partnerships. Today, we need to bring people and knowledge together so we can not only progress, but more importantly, to accelerate our advance towards our targets. As Alan Finkel, Australia's ex-chief scientist, put in his latest book, Getting to Zero, Australia's Energy Transition, and he says, quote, "Change is in the air. The global momentum and enthusiasm for solar and wind as our future primary energy sources, supported by big batteries, hydrogen, other storage technologies, distributed energy generation, managed loads, and digital technologies across all sectors of our economy, including transport and industry, is growing every day. I sense we will live through a technological revolution this decade as exciting as the conquest of space in the 1960s. So from that positive insight, it is my pleasure to introduce you today to our panelists. Our first panelist is Mr. Chris Bolester. Chris is the Policy Officer and Team Leader at the European Commission dealing with climate change, sustainability and environmental issues. He is the co-founder and former vice president of the Polish Electric Vehicle Foundation, and between 2012 and 2015, he was the member of 2 Polish environmental ministers and COP19 president. Welcome, Chris. How are you?
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for having me. That's a great pleasure. I envy you that you could already drink red wine. We are still on coffee. Yeah. Okay, so straight to my presentation. Hello, everyone, and a pleasure to be here. And I guess I'm going first because I will give you the flavor and the sort of background what is happening in the European Union in terms of in terms of climate and energy targets. It's been a great 5 years because the targets we are just finishing calculate today were agreed in 2009, and these are targets for 2020, and we only have data now streaming in, allowing us to see where countries are with these targets agreed for 2020. But we are already into the mode of having targets for 2030, and these are targets I put on this slide. It's not a mistake that there is some strike-throughs on this slide. It's just that I wanted to underline that initially the European Union leaders, so prime ministers and presidents of the European Union countries, agreed in 2014 that there will be a 40% reduction target for 2030. It's comparing to 1990, of course. So this target was agreed in 2014, together with other targets, helping targets. So 27% renewable energy consumption and 27% improvement of energy efficiency. However, during the political negotiations in 2018, the European Parliament and the representatives of the European Union countries agreed that these two targets should be put in a more ambitious figures. So in the end, we have what we have today. It's a 40% greenhouse gas reduction target. This has not changed, but now we have 32% renewable target and 32.5% energy efficiency target. And what I want to show you on the next slide is that these targets are not, they do not take every member state and every European country in the same way. You see that, of course, every country is different. They have different GDP per capita. They have different level of renewables potential. So on this slide, you see that as regards development of renewables, every country is going their own way. So the mechanism works in a way that we have a European target at the European level, and then we sit down and calculate which country has which potential. Then the countries negotiate between themselves, and we agreed a path for each country. So this is where we are today. Still, every country is going to meet their individual targets, and cumulatively as Europe, we have these targets I showed you on the next slide, on the previous slide. But on next slide, you see that we are moving, still moving. We are in a perfect storm, because in theory, we have these targets for 2030, but a couple of weeks ago, we already agreed, the politicians agreed, that these targets will be changed, will be again made more ambitious. So the date is still the same, 2030, but now we have a new target of 55% greenhouse gas reduction. This, of course, comes directly from the fact that the new Commission couple of years ago agreed the European New Green Deal, and part of that agreement was the headline target, if you will, climate neutrality by 2050. And therefore, to get to climate neutrality by 2050, we needed to up our ante in terms of greenhouse gas reduction target. So we still have all the legislation in place to meet the targets I mentioned earlier, and now we have to adapt to the new target that you see on this slide. So the whole machinery of the European Commission is now targeted to change all the legislation to actually meet the target which you see on the slide. What is quite important is that this time the politicians slightly changed their approach. So instead of agreeing 3 targets, energy efficiency, renewables, and CO2 emissions, now they started from the greenhouse gas emissions target. So only then we will see how to divide that target into renewables and into energy efficiency. This is still under discussion. Therefore, you see some X's on this slide. Next slide, please. I said that there is a number of legislation that we are working on in order to change the focus from the old targets to new targets. And there's a number of things we are doing. So there's a renewables directive that will actually see what kind of targets we need in renewables. There is a renovation wave and energy efficiency rules revision. This will help us to use the potential we have in reduction of the sector of buildings. Of course, there's a famous emission trading scheme that we are changing now. A side exercise from that is a carbon border adjustment mechanism. We'll see how it goes, but the Commission is quite determined to put it in place. Of course, it has to be in line with the WTO rules, but it's a very interesting exercise, and I guess we will see some proposals relatively soon. There is new emission standards on vehicles that is coming, and of course taxonomy and do no significant harm principles. These are quite technocratic, but what do they mean? Taxonomy is a guide issued by the European Union to the financial sector, saying what technologies are deemed sustainable and what are not. So this taxonomy will guide the financial sector where they should put the money and where this is unsustainable. And do no significant harm principle is basically a guide how to spend our recovery budget, which is 750 billion euro for recovery, economic recovery after COVID. So do no significant harm principle is a guide, again, this time to member states, on what investment they should spend these funds. And in the next slide, you see just main initiatives that are related to technologies. So we published offshore energy strategy because we think that ocean energy will be an important part of the renewables future. This includes of course, offshore wind, but also other forms of ocean energy. Hydrogen strategy is also a very important piece of our strategic work. And system integration strategy, that may sound very generic, but what it really is just first principle of electrifying all you can, including the hard to abate sectors, plus energy efficiency. So that could allow you to meet your climate targets very well. And I think for start, to give you the background, what is happening at the European level, that is my introduction. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you very much. Really interesting to see sustainable investment being the core there of progression and a catalyst for how we develop in this area. And I think that's across all countries, all barriers everywhere. So that is a really interesting perspective. Now, I'd like to welcome Marta Babic. Marta, welcome. Marta is currently the Director of the External Funds Department of the Poland's National Fund for Environmental Protection and Water Management, and that provide financial support to the largest environmental and water management projects. Prior to her current role, Marta was a chief advisor at the Polish energy company PSE Innovations and chief of the energy policy leader at the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Marta, welcome.
Thank you so much, Grażyna, both for ability to speak today and for the invitation and that introduction. Indeed, I have a pleasure to represent Polish National Fund for Environmental Protection and Water Management. And this is a Polish entity that is operating for over 30 years now. And I must say that probably we are a silent hero of the Polish green transition over the last 3 decades, as it seems that we have an impressive portfolio of green projects. And for years we have focused on environment protection, but de facto nowadays our key priority is energy transition, as most challenges to be tackled in Poland lie still there. So if I can continue the presentation of Chris, and hello Chris, it's lovely to see you over the oceans in the virtual reality. I would like to give you an insight into the newest strategic document agreed and announced by the Polish government. This is Polish strategy for energy up to 2040. And this is how Poland wants to contribute to the EU goals, to the achievement of the goals that Chris has just described. This is our Polish contribution to that huge challenge that the EU together is striving to meet. So there are 3 fundamental pillars of the new strategy. It's just transition. To our understanding, it's leaving no one behind in the energy transition in Poland. We have numerous coal-based regions where the local economies heavily depend on the heavy industry, on mining industry. We want to invest in those regions and make them the forefront of a green transition in Poland. The next pillar is zero emission energy system. That would probably not be surprising to you. That energy system in Poland nowadays is heavily dependent on coal. We want to change it. We want to shift into zero emission system. And last but not least, 3rd pillar is good air quality in Poland. And this is where we want to involve everybody, including individual Polish citizens. We want to fight the smog problem in Polish cities. I assume that in Australia you focus more on cooling. In Poland, heating, especially during the fall and winter time, is a challenge not only in terms of economics, but also state of the air quality. We identify a huge problem when it comes to individual sources of heating in Polish houses, very often fueled by coal or wood that brings a problem of local air pollution that we want to solve. The next slide would give you more insight into specific investment priorities that we have identified. It's the core regions transformation, and we want to direct huge amount of funds to help core regions transform into the greener, sustainable industries. And we want to activate up to 13 billion euro in the next 10 years for that goal. Then we want to reduce energy poverty, as very often those individual users that stick to coal or low quality wood when it comes to heating are driven by the energy poverty. We want to reduce that by 1/3 until 2030. And we want to generate up to 300,000 new green jobs in new green industries, in particular renewables and nuclear energy bound. The next slide is the priority that we see when it comes to zero emission energy system. We want to get there, we want to achieve that by investing in offshore wind energy, and we foresee up to 11 gigawatts in offshore wind energy by 2040. That's going to cost money, so we plan to invest up to 28 billion euro to make it happen. Then we see the need for stable zero energy sources in our energy system, and the answer seems to be nuclear energy. We would like to see up to 9 gigawatts by 2040, and yet again we need to invest to make it happen, and we assume we evaluate that we need to direct up to 33 billion euro to facilitate that. And last but not least, we want individual energy consumers to become prosumers, to become active parts of energy communities, local energy communities, based on renewables, based on smart metering, based on intelligent energy management systems. And we want to see 1 million new prosumers in our energy system, and around 300 energy communities by the end of that decade in Poland. The next slide is how we see our fight for good quality locally. And first and foremost, it's investing in heating systems transformation. These are predominantly coal-based nowadays. We want to motivate our heating companies to invest in zero emission energy sources, to invest in developing their grids, to make up to 1.5 million individual houses to be connected to heating systems. And also, we plan to ban coal from use in individual heating, in individual Polish houses, in cities by 2030 and in rural areas by 2040. And we hope that the extensive development of heating systems, of heating distribution systems, will actually make it possible. Then we want to heavily invest in climate-friendly housing, and we see zero energy housing development with up to 3 million individual heat sources that need to be modernized by 2030 in Polish homes. We also want to push the public sector to be the one ahead and in front of the run to zero emission building by investing in up to 1,000 low or even zero emission public buildings by the end of that decade. And again, last but not least, zero emission transport is what we want to focus on. In particular, public transport in big cities above 100,000 citizens. We plan to ban introduction of any new vehicles, public transport vehicles, to be non-zero emission. We expect that all the cities from 2035 will operate their public transport based on zero emission vehicles only. To make it happen, the next slide. to sum up, we expect that all these priorities, all these investments would result in at least 32% of renewables in our energy production, in 28% of renewables in our heating and cooling systems, and in 14% of renewables in transport, summing up to at least 23% of renewables in our overall energy consumption by 2030. And we need technologies, we need solutions and experiences of the countries and companies that are already there or that are already advanced in getting there. And we would seek cooperation when it comes to offshore and onshore wind, when it comes to solar energy as key technology facilitating these goals. In cooling and heating sector, we see biomass, heat pumps, biogas and geothermal energy to play a key role. And when it comes to transport, it's definitely biofuels, electric mobility, and hydrogen that we see part of electric mobility movement to play a key role. So we will, of course, invest in all kinds of projects facilitating deployment of these technologies in Poland, but partners and providers from all over the world are invited to take part in that investment process in Poland. When it comes to what we have already done in Poland, the next slide would provide you an outlook on what National Fund for Environmental Protection have already managed to invest in Poland. Over the last 30 years, we have co-funded projects, green projects. We helped entrepreneurs, local governments, state administration, education institutions, non-governmental organizations, and individuals in Poland to invest in the pool of projects summing up to 56 billion euro. When you look at the sources of funding that the National Fund is distributing, it's mainly domestic funds as we collect fees from Polish entrepreneurs whenever they use environment to operate. But also we are the biggest single operator of EU funds in Poland. And to date, we have managed to distribute 20 billion euros for green and transitional projects. And we expect that in the years to come, in the current decade, that proportion will even increase to the benefit of external EU funds, as we have been designated yet again as the operator of big pool of EU funds that we expect to be distributed as of this year. In the next slide, I would like to give you a short outlook of what we are currently investing in as at the National Fund. We are preparing for the big surge of funds from the EU that we expect by the end of this year by testing ideas and testing grants and inquiring the needs of the beneficiaries in Poland. And we have already identified and already launched several programs, investment programs last year that are still in operation this year in 5 key areas of needs that we see on the Polish market, which is investing in clean heat, which is investing in energy. In our understanding, it's renewable-based energy, including prosumers. It's water retention in Poland. We have huge problem when it comes to water management. nowadays, not in terms of the quality of water, but in the amounts that we have there. Last year, we have launched a pilot program supporting Polish individual homeowners to collect rainwater and to manage to use it on site for gardening or whatever is needed, to convince Polish people that water is a resource that needs protection, that needs proper management. And then it's eco-transport. Last year, we have launched a series of investment programs helping Polish individuals and Polish local governments to invest in zero-emission vehicles, electric and hydrogen driven. And we consider that innovations in energy, deployment of new technologies is absolutely a must in Poland to contribute to the EU goals. And that's why we have launched a pool of investment support for any Polish company willing to pilot, to implement a new technology or technology that is new on the Polish market, but have proven efficient in other markets. And we have managed to offer almost 2 billion euro last year for the beneficiaries in Poland to invest in all these fields. And the last slide I have for you today, it's a slide showing how much money we expect in the years to come. It's billions of euro that we are going to invest in clean air programs, in green public transport, clean heating, in PV panels, in wind energy in Poland. So whenever there's a partner, whenever there's a technology that could help us to spend these money in the best and most efficient, both in terms of environment and economy ways, you're invited to participate. Thank you so much. I'm open to any questions, if any.
Dziękuję bardzo, Marta. Thank you very much. That's very exciting. All the programs that you've got going, and God, the numbers of euros. You know, it's phenomenal. So no, that was a really informative presentation. Thank you so much, Marta. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce Anna Skarbeck. I mean, for our Australian audience, Anna needs no introduction. Anna is the powerhouse in Australia. She's at the forefront of Australia's move to reductions in innovative technology. I mean, Anna's been behind this for so long. But for more official introduction, Anna is the CEO of Climate Works Australia, that focus on analysing emissions reduction opportunities and partnering with business and government. And she's also a former banker and green policy advisor. Anna, welcome.
Thank you very much, Grazan, to the joint hosts of tonight. It's a pleasure to contribute. There aren't too many Australians who recognise that my surname is Polish, but whenever I'm in Europe, everybody recognises it. And indeed, my father's family moved from Poland when he was 9. So I do have a warm connection to both countries here. Climate Works is a non-profit independent organisation co-founded by Monash University and the Maya Foundation over a decade ago in 2009 to be a bridge between the research and action and help business and government implement the emissions reduction actions that are needed. So to my presentation tonight, I've been asked to cover the Australian perspective, the policies of governments in particular, and the pathways to achieving net zero emissions. And I think you'll notice a difference in scale in terms of the dollars of investments, even in comparison to euros. So I'll move, thank you, to the first slide. I'll begin with the state and territory governments rather than the national federal government. because each of the states and territories in Australia share the net zero emissions goal of the EU to achieve net zero by 2050. And in some of those states, it's legislated goal. So all of Australia is now represented by a state government with that target, but there is not yet a federal government formal target. So on the next page, next slide, thank you. The Australian government's formal target is still the NDC that it submitted at the Paris Agreement, the 2030 target of a 26 to 28% reduction. So that was the same emissions reduction number as the US, but 5 years later. And of course, last week, the US increased its 2030 target, as did EU and a number of other nations. Australia has not yet increased its 2030 target. And there is not yet a formal 2050 target for net zero, but there have been recent public statements from Australia's Prime Minister that Australia aims to reach net zero emissions as soon as possible and preferably by 2050. That is considered significant progress based on the recent, long history of the last decade, that since 2014, this government in Australia, the federal government, repealed the climate emissions reductions legislation, the trading scheme, and a number of other measures that was in legislation. But I show here on the side two institutions that were created and not repealed back then, and that is the investment institutions. So ARENA and the CFC. ARENA is the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, which provides grants, particularly investment funding for startups and early stage technologies and knowledge sharing. And for the next decade ahead, it was allocated about $1.5 billion Australian over the 10 years. And I note that Marta just mentioned, I think Poland allocated $2 billion just last year. The CEFC is Australia's green investment bank, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, and it is a real success story. It's one of the largest in the world. It has a capital allocation of 10 billion Australian dollars, and it's a revolving fund. So it mostly provides debt finance, concessional to clean energy projects. And so when that debt is repaid, it can continue to be reinvested. So the Australian government has taken a technology investment approach. It has, as its supporting measures, a technology investment roadmap, which is a statement with targets and priority technologies named in it. It doesn't yet have policies that would legislate targets around those technologies. But there are some other investment programs, such as the Modern Manufacturing Fund, and some bilateral agreements with some state and territory governments to provide investment financing to their energy and emission reduction programs. And there is what's called the Emissions Reduction Fund, which is a government mechanism at the moment for purchasing carbon reduction credits, so certificates for emissions reduction under specified methodologies. It was part of the previous emissions trading scheme, and when the scheme was repealed, the credits were maintained, but there is not a market trading mechanism for those. The government acts as a purchaser in auctions regularly. Might move to the next slide. Thank you. Just to explain where Australia's emissions come from. I know you may have received this in your background papers for tonight's webinar. Relatively similar to Poland. The inner circle there shows that about a third of Australia's emissions come from the electricity sector, that's the yellow, and the other third, the blue, darker blue, is industry. And then a fifth is transport, and the remainder is agriculture broadly. When you look at the sectors that use the electricity, that's the outer circle there. So you see buildings is a predominant user alongside transport, and of course industry being half. To the next slide. What happens if we want to achieve the net zero emissions goals of the state governments and potentially soon to be a federal government goal? ClimateWorks has worked with Australia's national research agency, the CSIRO, Commonwealth Science and Industry Research Organisation, over the past decade to do significant scenarios for across the Australian economy. How can net zero emissions be achieved? We did those in 2014 prior to the Paris Agreement, and we updated them in the last couple of years and published at the start of last year. So what we show here is that Australia can achieve net zero emissions using technologies that are already available and either mature or demonstrated or emerging. What you'll see is we've mapped here how quickly could we achieve that in line with a 2-degree goal, that's the upper orange lines, or a 1.5-degree goal, which goes more steeply. And what you see is that the 2030 dotted line there on the left shows what the targets would be for emissions reduction to be within those Paris trajectories. And so at the steepest line, 74% reduction for the 1.5-degree scenario, and around 50%, 48 to 54, for the 2-degree scenarios, which you'll see is aligned with the EU new target. And indeed, it is following a science-based trajectory broadly. So we looked at what are the technologies that can achieve that. And on the right, you'll see the technologies by sector that match the 1.5-degree scenario. And what you'll see is that the time that it takes to actually convert all the equipment and infrastructure across those sectors, the purple wedge there being buildings, the blue being transport, the darker blue being industry, and the lighter green being agriculture. You'll see there that whilst it is a steep decline, it doesn't decline to zero by 2035, but we can achieve net zero if we dramatically increase carbon forestry and nature-based sequestration. And so that's what the darker green share underneath the line illustrates, so that the dotted line can show a net zero trajectory in line with the 1.5-degree pathway, so that while there are still continuing industrial and transport emissions until the last of the fleet is upgraded, we need to continue to do substantial carbon forestry sequestration, which of course is not a permanent ability to continue to offset, but it can manage the decade difference between eliminating the emissions from the physical economy while achieving the tighter trajectories of what a 1.5-degree pace requires. The next slide talks about what the technologies within each of those sectors, the same colour coding there to show, and these are the technologies that were mentioned in the opening remarks. It is very similar worldwide across electricity, buildings, transport, industry, and agriculture. You'll see on the left, we've identified that in all of these sectors, there are demonstrated and mature solutions available now, and in some sectors, emerging solutions that would be needed to deliver zero emissions solutions in every sector. And they are the technologies we've heard mentioned previously: biofuels, synfuels, electrification, ammonia or hydrogen for long-haul transport, material substitution and high-grade heat electrification, alongside hydrogen in energy, plus energy efficiency, of course, and bioenergy, and electrification and renewables. Earlier, back in 2014, ClimateWorks and CSIRO did study the potential for nuclear in Australia to also achieve net zero emissions alongside renewables. And what we found when we looked at the data again in 2020 is the cost reductions have been so great in renewables now that is the most cost-effective way to achieve economy-wide 100% renewable electricity for Australia. So the next slide looks into that in more detail. These three charts that show the three scenarios to net zero emissions, 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees, for the electricity grid. And what you see here is the electrification story and the renewables story. So the colours showing the yellow being the renewables share increasing, large-scale solar and rooftop, and of course the black and grey being coal and gas decreasing. But what you'll also show is the total volume of electricity generation rising. And that's the electrification of industry and transport, as well as maintaining the supply of electricity to the existing uses and decarbonising that through renewables. Now, this is modelling to show the electrification just of what we call domestic emissions, not our exports. So when we add the production of renewable hydrogen to replace all of our fossil fuel exports at the moment, when you think about what Australia's great potential is, we are currently one of the world's top exporters of LNG gas. and we could become one of the world's largest producers of hydrogen, which can be exported and produced with renewable electricity or exported as ammonia. And so when we look at the early analysis on what the increased renewable energy generation might be to power our exports industry, certainly there's been, many Australians would be familiar with the Clean Energy Superpower book that Professor Ross Garnaut wrote. We see that the scale of renewables that you see here roughly doubling could increase 5 or to 7-fold, so potentially a 700% increase in our current total energy generation if we were to be a renewable energy exporter and use our surplus of sunshine potential, really, as well as wind and onshore and offshore, to create export markets for the commodities, metals, minerals and chemicals that we are already strong in. So the next slide, just to close, is what are the policies in relation to renewable electricity for this energy transition dialogue. And again, we turn to the states because the federal policy has been a point of contention. There was a renewable energy target put in place for 20 years ago, and there have been a number of attempts to replace it with other versions, the National Energy Guarantee and, of course, the repealed emissions trading scheme. And none of those political attempts have succeeded yet. But at the state level, you can see here, most of the states have targets of at least 50% renewables by 2030, and in some cases, 100% for South Australia and ACT, where Canberra is, and 200% in Tasmania. The states are also investing directly in their energy grids through transmission planning and investment, in particular in what's called renewable energy zones. And a number of states now are investing hundreds of millions of dollars to call forward some of the transmission in dedicated regions where renewable energy production is particularly strong. I'll conclude there. That's the last slide. Thank you. And look forward to the discussion that's to come.
Thanks, Anna. Thank you so much. And thank you for all your wonderful work, your continued work. It's really valued by everyone here in Australia. So thank you again. Thank you. All right. It's now time to ask questions of the panelists. If I could ask the audience to put their questions through the Q&A function rather than the chat function, that would be fantastic. But I'll just start off with some general questions. It's a broad, overarching sort of question in the sense of the concept of transition means different things to different people and different countries, and we've seen that here in Australia, transition in the energy sector is particularly polarising. Just firstly for Marta, is this polarisation an issue for Poland?
Thank you, Grażyna. Indeed, I guess this is an issue in every part of the world when local economies are traditionally based on coal and other fossil fuels. So these societies, these local inhabitants whose livelihoods are dependent or have been dependent for decades on these industries naturally feel uneasy. That's why when planning the Polish energy transition, we put the investments and focus on traditionally coal mining based regions to be one of the first to benefit from transition into green zero emission energy. And ideally, we would see these regions as the new hubs of investments, of deployment of green technologies. And also another thing is to involve each and every group into the transition, both in in solving the challenges and contributing and taking part in all the benefits. And from the point of view of Poland, we do our best to invest, to direct financial support, and also all sorts of counseling, energy audits, etc., not only to the energy and industry sectors, but also to local governments and individual Polish citizens to be able to invest and participate in all the process. So yes, answering your question, it is polarizing, but there are ways to manage it. There are ways to bring everyone to the table. Thank you.
In other words, Marta, there is light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak.
Yes, at least I already see it.
Fantastic. Chris, from an EU perspective, how's it dealt with across the EU?
Yeah, thanks. Of course, when you talk about just transition, what immediately comes to mind is coal, because this is a paragon of change. But what we have to realize is that carbon neutrality means that we will have to change completely our lives. Like, this is a totally different reality, and it will touch on every part of how we live. And so what transition means is treated differently in wherever you are and whatever you do. So this is how we approach helping people through the transition. Is the famous motto, to leave no one behind. And it's not only that we want to help miners, but as I said, it will change everything. So we need to help farmers to adjust to new ways of production of the food, and how they fertilize, how they treat the soil. We need to help the industries, because today the car industry is still based on internal combustion engine. But if we transition away from that, you have to remember that an electric car is 30% parts lighter than internal combustion engine. So it comes with less jobs that are necessary to maintain the same amount of production. And it's the same goes for buildings, because what climate neutrality in the building sector means is that today we have a building stock that is 75% of that building stock is energy inefficient, and they will still stay, these buildings, in 2050 when we need them decarbonized. So we need to help people to actually renovate the houses and not transition to energy poverty. So it's a number of things we have to do, a number of sectors. Then we need to carefully help through the transition, and it means different things to different people. What we have secured at this stage is 170 billion euro for helping through the just transition in Europe. There's a special dedicated fund of 40 billion euro until 2027. And this money will only be a part of that. What is very important, what Marta already said, is a dialogue, because money is one thing, and you can throw money at people and they will still do nothing, because you have to talk to them, you have to convince them the change is necessary, the change is coming, and they need to be on side with what's happening. Otherwise, you will have things like yellow vests in France, because this is also something that happened because of the transition, because how poorly it was explained.
Chris, I just want to pick that up. I think one of my bugbears is communication, how we communicate, as you say, transitioning or new technology or a better way of living or doing things. And this is something that I find we fail a lot in Australia, and I don't know if it's done in other countries, but making people feel secure in this transition, making people see the vision, And, you know, it's sort of opening people's eyes, I think, more so than sort of going back into the security of the past. Yes, it was good in the old days. Let's go back to the old days. Would you agree?
Yeah, I totally agree. And also, you know, people when changing, people need to keep their dignity, and you have to keep them engaged, or else people don't like to be told what they have to do. They need to be engaged and help with stuff. So that I totally agree. Yeah, communication is
big. Okay, thanks, Chris. Anna, from an Australian perspective, how do you see it?
Well, on the polarisation question, what we've seen is indeed a bit of a shift towards, as you were just talking about, the communication, seeing it, feeling it. And what we see is a place-based strategy by region and also by sector to focus on the promise where the opportunity is. And so some examples of that obviously is the National Hydrogen Strategy, which I think was a significant turning point amongst context globally, where the Australian government, through the chief scientist, Alan Finkel, whose book you quoted from, convened industry leaders and sectors to discuss what would Australia's potential be for a hydrogen market, and what were the issues that would need to be resolved. And that brings the players together to discuss the opportunity, and then they can jointly problem solve. It still needs resourcing. There's not yet a roadmap that really sits underneath that strategy, but it's the beginning of a sector-based approach. Similarly, at the region-based level, we see particularly the coal regions, the Latrobe Valley in Victoria, my home state, where the bulk of the brown coal is in Australia, has now a state government authority, the Latrobe Valley Authority, which was deliberately set up with a majority of locally employed staff to support the energy transition. And it has begun by helping the region craft its own vision for its future and support, as you mentioned, Chris, all of the industries, not just the coal workers, but all of the other industries to participate with training, startup funding, and large and small industry, as well as to understand what matters to people and the opportunities that they wish to seek. At that time, they didn't have an upfront plan of what the transition would look like, and this has helped the sector come together. We see in Hunter Valley some self-organising versions of that. A dozen locally based groups with unions and community environment groups have come together in the Hunter Jobs Alliance, and the Hunter Valley, of course, is near the coal port for a lot of our coal exports, and a big coal region for domestic power generation also. And in Gladstone, just last week, which is a region in central Queensland, which is strong in a range of heavy industries at the moment that are all affected by the shift away from fossil fuels. And so there was a major summit, the Central Queensland Energy Futures Summit, which focused on the future transition, bringing a shared vision of what that looks like, and to help all players sort of see the economic case for opportunity and change. So we're seeing much more investment of time and energy in that. My own team are doing a similar work with the agriculture sector here, the conservation movement, land management, focused on sustainable land use futures in Australia, and indeed convened last year very diverse group of stakeholders, agricultural peak bodies for different commodities, the conservation groups and Farmers for Climate Action, as well as National Farmers Federation and others, to discuss what does a sustainable, prosperous future look like for regional Australia in relation to farming and regional communities. And it was a much more wide sort of holistic view of future when you broaden the question around sustainability for vibrant regional cities and towns, not only vibrant regional commodity markets, for example.
Thanks, Anna. Thank you so much. Look, there's questions coming through the Q&A, which I might just go to them at the moment. One from Peter Kasprach, So far, Australian government decided against introducing incentives for zero emission vehicles. State of Victoria is planning to introduce road usage fees of 2.5 cents per kilometre charge for electric and other zero emission vehicles, including hydrogen vehicles, and 2 cents per kilometre for plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. It has been called the worst electric vehicle policy in the world. What EV incentives are currently in place in Poland and possibly in the EU? Are there plans to expand them in order to achieve zero emission? Marta, I might ask you that one. You're the one for that one at the moment.
Oh, thank you. Yes, when it comes, I understand the question is how we are going to facilitate and push for zero emission transport in Poland. So we are going to, and we are already using both legislative and financial tools. And I would start from financial ones. This is the National Fund for Environment Protection that offers funding to local governments when it comes to purchase of zero emission buses and their charging infrastructure. And we have already launched first ever big financial program last year, resulting in almost 300 buses proposed to be bought by the local governments in 3 months, I guess. We have collected that amount of interest from the Polish local governments. Also, we have introduced and we are testing optimal levels of grants for individuals who are thinking of shifting from combustible to an electric cars. We are also working on the financial programs for the charging infrastructure providers and operators. So this is how we want to push and invest in it. We also want to spend a big part of the EU money under the EU recovery plan to fund, to help finance factories of electric cars, components of the batteries and hydrogen infrastructure needed for the development of that part of the market, and that would be where the money goes. But also we introduce new regulations, new requirements for local governments to introduce clean transport areas, especially in the city centers. We also introduce new regulations pushing local government and public sector for tendering focused on zero emission vehicles. And we want to educate Polish citizens about the benefits of public transport, zero emission public transport, using your bike to commute and shifting from your loved combustible to even more loved electric individual car. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. I'll jump onto, because we are running out of time, but there are questions coming through which I want to get through. So here's one for Anna from John O'Brien. There is a move by SBTI and others away from nature-based solutions towards ones that are deemed more permanent. Do you think this is going to inhibit investment into the offset market over the next decade? And a linked question for Marta, what are the trends in the offset market in Poland? But I'll go to Anna first.
Thanks, and it's a great question. And hello, John, out there in the audience. The key distinction here is to pay attention to the clear difference between nature-based solutions and offsets as a concept. At the moment, they've been blurred because sometimes the underlying asset, for example, the land on which there is an improved land management strategy, whether it's plant revegetation, carbon forestry plantings, or soil carbon different cropping, for example. Nature-based solutions are currently readily available for what has been considered purchase as offsets. We see it, right? The companies that want to become carbon neutral, they do what they can to reduce their electricity and other emissions, and then for the remainder, which is often their transport emissions and food supply chain, they purchase offsets, and the easiest offsets to purchase have been nature-based. But it is clear that they are different concepts, and by which I mean offsets are a temporary concept. Nature-based solutions must be a permanent feature of our food production supply chain. Of course, nothing's permanent we know in Australia, being bushfire prone, of course, lands are ecosystems that are always evolving. But the point is, incentivising nature-based solutions is an absolutely essential pathway to achieving a stable climate. We must delink the concept of offsets from that and see them as additive, because we know the sheer maths of it. All emissions that can be eliminated must be, and we still need all the nature-based solutions that we possibly can manage in an integrated farming way in order to maintain food production lands and stay within the planetary boundaries of soil and health and water and species health that maintain our very livelihoods and health. So the detachment I'm referring to is that I think financial markets and other standard setters and accreditations around what we call science-based trajectories will soon not permit offsets where there is a substitution for the emission source instead. So the green bonds criteria have already declared this. The Climate Bonds Initiative has set out a framework for transition finance. So there's already the taxonomy you mentioned, Chris, for what you might call clean assets or green assets. Where assets are brown but going green and in transition, the new framework that was released last year has 5 clear steps, and step 3 says offsets don't count. And so it's a flowchart which says, can this be decarbonised? If so, good, where are you on the path to that? If not, full stop. And it's a very blunt message. So I think the offsets market will be essential for the coming decade in particular, when some of the solutions in the column I showed as emerging, green hydrogen, for example, are not yet available at scale. And so the definition of can it be eliminated today, and if not, carbon neutrality will require bringing forward the nature-based solutions. But if it can, and particularly transport, electric buses was a great example. We know electric vehicles are economic today and available. And so it won't be long, I would have thought, until the market sets its own definitions and criteria for what's acceptable, and offsetting petrol car emissions, for example, I would predict would fail future green finance thresholds and tests.
Thanks, Anna. Marta, do you just want to quickly jump in there, because we haven't got much time, but just a quick answer?
Yes, especially that I support Anna, and indeed, offsetting is a way to increase awareness where the leap to the zero emission solution is not already available. But whenever it is available, also we are pushing and facilitating investments in neutral solutions rather than offsetting. Thank you.
Okay. Look, I will have to, we've got so many more questions, and obviously we have to do another webinar on this, because there's some really, really interesting questions coming through. So I do apologise to the audience, but I assure you my co-organisers will definitely be working on more webinars. I'd like to really thank the panellists for participating in this session. It's the first of its kind. We're very excited to have got just the expertise from Marta, Chris and Anna together, and be able to give you a little bit of an inkling of what is happening in the transition to renewables, which I must admit I'm really buoyed, and I think there's a really positive future. Having Polish parents and living in Australia, I've got a bit in both camps. So as I said, I think there's a huge potential here. So thank you very much to our speakers. Thank you very much. Thanks. Now I would like to introduce Marta Piszcz, and Marta is the Granivo project manager that is part of Poland's Ministry of Climate and Environment. She is in charge of development and coordination of Granivo project, which aims to disseminate Polish green technologies globally. Marta is also a Polish representative of UNIDO in the area of circular economy. And Marta, I must say that I was very excited to be part of the Granivo mission in Brisbane and one in Melbourne. So, and some of the amazing technologies that that Granivo does generate. So I'm really interested to hear what you have to say. Thank you, Marta.
Thank you so much for the introduction and invitation as well. Good morning and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to attend this webinar as a representative of Polish Ministry of Climate and Environment, and to have the opportunity to present some general information on energy policy. But I have a good news, because thanks to Mrs. Marta Babic, we already ran through this, and I can be brief with that and focus more on Granivo project, which I'm very bound to as coordinator of the project. So firstly, I will just briefly go through the energy policy. PAP 2040, which has been approved this year, sets the framework for the energy transition in Poland, as was said before. It contains strategic decisions regarding the selection of technologies used to establish a low-emission energy system. And here you have a link where you can find it also in English version if you're interested. This is the national contribution to EU's climate and energy policy. It takes into account the scale of the challenge of adapting the domestic economy to EU regulatory considerations, which is related with the European Green Deal. It's related with COVID pandemic recovery plan, and also stays in line with national capabilities to contribute to the Paris Agreement. It is also one of 9 integrated strategies resulting from the National Polish Strategy for Sustainable Development. Next slide, please. Thank you. The statutory goal of the state's energy policy is energy security, while ensuring the competitiveness of the economy, energy efficiency, and reducing the impact on the environment. Next slide, please. These pillars were already described by Mrs. Babic, thanks. So only to sum up, these 3 pillars give the framework to make further decisions and create directions of actions which will contribute to the desired transformation. Next slide, please. Here we have the indicators adopted as the global measures, but they were described in detail. So I will only add that all the activities set in this policy, they aim to increase energy efficiency, modernization of energy sources, transmission networks, smart grids, and renewable energy, and will be beneficial for the environment according to regulatory impact assessment made after it. These were general data on energy policy, and that's one of our activities as a ministry, to create these legal frameworks. But besides that, we also do some direct actions which are meant to get us closer to these goals, and one of them is Granivo projects. Next slide, please. This is the initiative of our ministry, and the main goal is to promote Polish green technologies at the local and global level. We support mainly small and medium-sized enterprises in the process of the international transfer of their technologies. All of this action contribute to stimulate sustainable development. Next slide. Thank you. Our participants have technologies in the area which are somehow related with the environment, but actually every entrepreneur who will prove that his technology brings some positive impact on the environment has a chance to become our laureate. How do we understand this feature that they bring positive impact? So the impact can be direct, like for example, purifying water or the air, but it can be also more indirect. And if the entrepreneur proves that his technology has less negative impact on the environment in relation to existing alternatives, he still has opportunity to become the laureate. Next slide, please. GreenEvo, it's a continuous initiative of the ministry, but it's built up with singular editions, and each edition has two main stages. First stage is aimed to identify the best green technologies. Therefore, we organize a competition for Polish entrepreneurs. We announce it and we collect the applications. Further, we conduct formal and substantive assessment, during which we verify the technologies with the help of external experts. Basing on the results, we choose the winners, who are GreenEvo laureates, and we start with global market analysis to find where these technologies have best potential to transfer their technologies. We also organize trainings for entrepreneurs to give them tools, give them knowledge to prepare them for effective expansion. And as the last point, but most important, we organize trade missions. We give the laureates the possibility to present their technologies in front of international audience and to initiate promising business contacts. Next slide, please. Here we have some basic information on the project. So far we have completed 8 editions. We have chosen more than 60 companies who offer more than 70 green technologies. We have organized more than 70 commercial missions to more than 50 countries all over the world. What is very important that this is one of the initiatives funded by National Fund for Environmental Protection and Water Management. So it's a very practical example of what the fund is doing on this more particular level. And to give you more details on what is happening now, because of the pandemic, we had to stop traveling. So we created a framework to be able to continue with this part, but in virtual world. So now we are more focused to present our technologies during international events, but online. But still, we are prepared to do stationary missions once the restrictions will let us do this. Next slide, please. And in this area of international cooperation, we work closely with other Polish institutions such as Ministry of Foreign Affairs or Polish Investment and Trade Agency, Polish Chamber of Commerce and Ministry of Development Funds and Regional Policy. And because they have network of international posts and offices, cooperation with them really increases the effectiveness of our actions. Therefore, the outcomes for the laureates are unquestionable. We give them the opportunity to find business partners. We build a platform for them to exchange experience and knowledge, and further, because they are able to build partnerships, we bring solutions to global problems, sometimes very complex and very specific. And in the end, we stimulate sustainable development as well. So Australia is one of the countries which was identified already in 2019 as a potential direction of our expansion, thanks to cooperation with Polish Agency of Trade and Investment. And we have already identified some laureates who might be interesting for Australian partners, but we also have a new group of laureates from the last year, and this year we will announce a new competition, so we expect to have another laureate in the beginning of next year, and we hope to be able to visit Australia, maybe not this, but hopefully next year with this strong group of Polish entrepreneurs. Next slide, please. Why our technologies are so unique? So they bring positive ecological effect. They correspond to the current state of technical knowledge. They are reliable and verified, of high quality, competitive, and what is important to us, they are Polish. Next slide, please. At the moment, we are supporting around 30 active companies, Green Evo laureates, with more than 30 technologies. But here I have chosen some examples of the technologies which are related with energy sector. These are technologies supporting energy efficiency. We have, for example, geothermal heat pumps, smart street lighting management system, and fuel converter, which is used in traditional fuels, but has a very good impact on the diminishing the emissions. We have interesting technologies from biomass sector, and one technology related with e-mobility. This is the sector which we want to develop, and we want to engage more entrepreneurs to new additions. All of them are companies who act abroad and already sell their products to another countries, so they are experienced, reliable, and we can offer them, promote them to our partners. We have a website of our project, which has also an English version, and there you will find all the profile of our laureates. If you would like to find out more information, please visit our website. Next slide. Thank you so much, and thank you for the attention. Feel welcome to contact us in any matter related to Green Evo. Thanks.
Thank you, Marta, very much. And as I said, it was a real pleasure meeting some of the your laureates out here in Australia. There is some very innovative technology that you are awarding, and we look forward to future visits and cooperation with you. Thank you so much. Now, thank you for everybody for participating. I would like to call upon Philip Link for some closing remarks. Now, Philip is the engagement manager of the Polish Australian Business Forum, who one of the organisers today, and the CEO of Energy Link Services. Philip has over 15 years, I was going to say 35, I was aging you, Philip, so it's only 15 years of experience in management consulting and advisory across vastly diverse interests, and these are a lot of interests, Philip, within clean tech, from carbon management, energy efficiency, renewable energy and biofuels, sustainability and climate disclosure, and economic and cost benefit analysis. Wow, Philip, this is amazing. Phil, I'd like to introduce you, Philip Link.
Thank you so much, Grażyna, and thank you to everyone and the speakers. And look, I'm going to be very short because I know we're running out of time. And I agree wholeheartedly. We need to keep this conversation going. What a great rounds of comments and conversations, from targets to discussions around EVs to incubators. I'm just fascinated with this space, and I'm actually sitting here in regional South Australia in a town called Millicent, where through the work that I do at Energy Link Services, where we help to decarbonise, or at least assist companies to decarbonise through to the clean energy transition. What we've been talking about, I'm actually here doing on the ground, and it's fascinating. I've been looking at some biomass boilers today, generating heat for steam, and biochar and solutions which are really tying everything together. So I guess where I'm really coming to this with, it's actually happening, and there are economic solutions that are going to lead this transition, and it's really warming to see the caliber of people here. But it's also great to ground truth what we're talking about with action on the ground. So it is great. So what I would really just like to say is that we should come back together, have another forum, but also I would encourage everybody, as Grażyna said, another hat that I wear is the head of partnerships at the Polish Australian Business Forum, or PABF, and we're a joint collaborator with this with the Banksy Foundation and PAIH to bring this forum. And so I'd encourage everyone that has been listening today to hop onto our website. The details I'm sure can be sent through on the chat now, and join us, because that's where the conversation happens. We're developing an ecosystem of entrepreneurs, like-minded people, where we would love to continue the conversation, but also present an ecosystem where, if you are an Australian business, or a Polish business for that matter, would like to get into the marketplace and into our network, you're more than welcome to. And we encourage Polish businesses that want to set up here in Australia, be it in the energy sector, be it as legal practitioners, be it in finance, to join us, because we'll love to talk to you, we'd love to help you, and vice versa. Australian businesses and people that are joining online now, that are either in the energy space, such as we are, and my company are actively looking for opportunities over in Poland. So already here speaking to Marta and Chris and a few others, or both Martas, I'm going to reach out to you individually. But Australian businesses that are looking to do things in Poland, because from what I've just heard, the opportunity is vast, the opportunity is great, and the ability for us to share our knowledge in how we're going to go about decarbonising is fantastic. So I guess with that, thank you to everybody. Thank you to Grażyna for so wonderfully orchestrating today's forum, and good night.
Thank you, Philip. I just want to just do a thank you to everybody, especially behind the scenes. I'd like to thank Dorota Bakal and Rafael Jarosz. Again, I'd like to thank all our speakers, Chris Bolesta, Marta Babic, Anna Skarbek, and as I said, Marta Babic, and and Marta Pischt. And Philip, also to you, thank you. And as I said, I think from everyone's perspective, this would be something to carry on into the future and continue the conversation. So as they say in Polish, do zobaczenia, and in Australia, see you later. Thank you very much.